When they indict George Soros, they're going to use the information from the Heritage Foundation. Listen to this.
Propaganda sausage making the summer of love. Joe Friday's report. The case of the manipulated protest data. A conversation with Mike Benz, narrator's voice. This is the true story, folks. Names are changed to protect the innocent. I'm Joe Friday, retired LAPD sergeant, working the facts in Washington, D.C., September 2025. My job: unravel the mess around the 2020 protests after George Floyd's death. I'm teamed up with Mike Benz, ex-State Department guy who knows how data gets twisted. We're keeping it simple, chronological, and straight to the point. Just the facts. Joe Friday. Mike, Joe Friday here. Let's cut through the noise on this ACLED outfit, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. They tracked the 2020 protests, said most were peaceful, but groups like the Heritage Foundation claim they fudged the numbers to push a defund the police story. We're laying it out step by step, year by year, easy to follow. You ready, Mike Benz? Ready, Joe. I saw plenty of data games at state. Let's walk through what happened, plain and simple. Joe Friday. Fact 1, May 25, 2020. George Floyd's killed by Minneapolis police. Protests explode. Black Lives Matter rallies hit every state. AC-led, a group that tracks conflicts, starts logging these events. By August, they've got over 7,750 protests in 2,440 cities. Their big claim: 93% are peaceful, no fights, no damage, no arrests. How? They split events into categories. Peaceful marches are one thing. Riots, looting, burning are another. Arrests, often tagged as police overreach, and not always tied to the protest itself. That's their rulebook, plain as day. Mike Benz. Yeah, Joe, that's where it gets fishy. By September 2020, a CLEADS report says 95% of 10,100 protests are peaceful. But dig deeper. They admit to 633 riots, and 88% of those are tied to BLM folks. That's over 500 violent events. Fires in Portland, looting in Minneapolis. Damage, up to $2 billion, says the insurance industry. ACLED buries that, pushes the peaceful angle. Why? Their funding, cash from George Soros's Open Society Foundations and USAID. Smells like a slant to me. Joe Friday, let's keep it moving. September 2020, Heritage Foundation steps in. A guy named Mike Gonzalez, not you, Mike, writes a piece saying Euclid's hiding the truth. Those 633 riots. They're not some side note. Businesses burned, like in Minneapolis's 3rd Precinct. He says Euclid's splitting hairs to make BLM look tame, helping the defund the police crowd. Points out Soros's group dropped $220 million on racial justice causes that year. ACLED's open about the money, but the numbers feel cherry-picked. Mike Benz, October 2020. Gonzalez doubles down in a book, says BLM's got Marxist roots. Leaders like Patrisse Cullors call themselves trained Marxists. This wasn't random. Protests were planned, going back to Ferguson in 2014. ACLED's data skips that history. They logged 12,000 protests, 630 riots, but don't connect the dots. BLM sent 127 million emails to organize. Groups like the Party for Socialism and Liberation were in deep. ACLED's focus. Just the events, not the big picture. Joe Friday, November 2020, election season. Protests keep going. Media loves ACLED's mostly peaceful line. But crime's spiking. FBI says murders jumped 30% from 2019 to 2020, from 16,425 to over 21,000. Chicago's up 50%, New York 45%. Why? Cops pulling back. What Heritage calls the Ferguson effect, after all the riot scrutiny. ACLED doesn't touch this. They stick to protests, not the chaos around them. Mike Benz, February 2021. ACLED's full 2020 report drops. Over 22,900 events total, 47% BLM related. They note 73% of car ramming attacks hit peaceful BLM protests, pushing a cops are the problem story. But May to June 2020, riots everywhere. 15 to 26 million people protested, and escalations hit hard. ACLED still calls it peaceful overall. Joe Friday, mid-2021, Heritage keeps hammering. Another Gonzalez piece says AC-led ignores crimes tied to the unrest. Like a young mom, Sekia Johnson, shot in Indianapolis in July 2020, her 16-year-old Antonio Mays Jr. killed in Seattle's no-cop zone, Chaz, in June. At least 25 deaths total from riots. ACLED's trick. If arrests or violence happen after a protest, they're not linked. Makes the protests look cleaner than they were. Mike Benz, right, Joe. And the funding. USAID and Soros's groups bankroll AC-led. Same money flows to BLM and even Palestinian groups tied to radicals. By 2022, Heritage is pushing for a congressional probe. Their February piece says $2 billion in damage, 25 dead, 600 plus riots, all downplayed by ACLED's narrow focus. They want answers on BLM's Marxist playbook. Joe Friday, 2023, Heritage is still at it. January, they say BLM's influence lingers, crimes up, schools are teaching critical race theory, all tied to 2020's chaos. By July, another call for Congress to investigate. Facts: 6:30 riots, 25 deaths, including cop ambushes in Oakland. ACLED's coding keeps these separate, making defund the police arguments easier. Mike Benz, 2024, Heritage ties it all together. They point out the revolutionary ecosystem, same funders like Soros's groups and Tides Foundation backing BLM and pro-Palestine protests. A guy like Manolo de los Santos, trained in Cuba, pushes for more 2020-style riots. ACLED's data still protects that network by focusing only on events, not the money or motives behind them. Joe Friday, that's the rundown, Mike. Timeline's clear. May 2020, protests kick off. September, AC-led says, mostly peaceful, but hides 633 riots. Heritage calls it out from 2020 to 2024, undercounted $2 billion in damage, ignored 30% crime spikes, and funding from Soros and USAID raises red flags. The method: split protests from riots and arrests, even if they're related. Result: data pushes defund the police while cities burn. We need the full picture: crime, costs, context. No spin, just the facts. Mike Benz, you nailed it, Joe. ACLED's data's useful but slanted. Heritage's got the receipts, years of evidence showing how the numbers mislead. Case isn't closed till we get honest data. Joe Friday, agreed. My name's Friday. I carry a badge 714. Stick to the truth, folks. That's all we've got. Narrator's voice. That was the story of the 2020 protest data. The facts are in, but the case is still open. Stay sharp, America. Notes on changes: simplified language. The text uses plain, conversational language in Joe Friday's no-nonsense style from Dragnet, avoiding jargon. Complex terms like methodology are replaced with rulebook or coding. Numbers are rounded for clarity, e.g., 93-95% to 93%. Chronological clarity. Events are strictly ordered from May 2020 to 2024, with each year's developments AC-led reports, Heritage critiques presented as a timeline for easy tracking. Joe Friday voice. Short sentences, direct statements, and repeated, just the facts, emphasize Friday's fact-driven persona. Mike Benz is positioned as a knowledgeable partner, reflecting his real-world expertise. Removed web links. All hyperlinks.
That's how they propagandized Democrats into believing the summer of love wasn't violent. It's total horseshit.